Good morning, Biology B students. I'm back. Yes, I'm still in quarantine, but doing well. And my dog is not bothering me right now either, which is kind of nice. Anyway, I have the Jamboard up, which is in Google Class. So if we were to go to our Google Class, we would go to third hour and we will see that there is a week 4 Jamboard. And this needs to be completed daily. And so let me show you what that looks like again so you can see. We see here we have our Jamboard, and the first slide is going to be always the one that needs to be completed on a daily basis. And so the question that I have for today is related to DNA structure and function. You've started to do some research on DNA, and hopefully by now you know what it's kind of made of in terms of its little tiny components, what's in a nucleotide, and so forth. And so that's kind of what you're uncovering. But here's some questions to think about. These Jamboard questions are more like open-ended and hopefully thought-provoking. Why is it important that the code doesn't change for most organisms? For example, my DNA is nothing like my dog Yukon's. I mean, he's going to have a set of DNA that's different than mine. Why is it important that his stays the same and mine stays the same for the most part? And, are there differences between you and I? I'm sure there are. Well, what does that mean in terms of DNA? And then the second question is, how does the structure of DNA protect the code? And, why is that important? So, again, a good explanation. If you want to use 2 sticky notes, by all means, knock yourself out, but go ahead and at least answer both those questions on your sticky note and try to leave your name at the end of your sticky note too, so I can check these to make sure I know whose is whose. Again, open-ended question, try your best on that. So as we look through the Jamboard, that's a template slide, so don't bother there. We've only had a few people participate so far, and so this question on protein, what your analogy was, I thought these were kind of cool. I mean, I saw some people use Legos, which is awesome, and somebody used a house. I built mine, and mine was, talking about building a web page. Again, try to make sure that you get these done as well if you want full credit for this week's Jamboard. So make sure you put in what your analogy is, what you explained about, basically what a protein is. And that's where we make stuff using our DNA as sort of like a recipe. So we had a question there. We had a question that asked you, what do you understand better about DMD? And most of you mentioned you knew something about the dystrophin and how that's involved with DMD. And again, we'll get back to that. And I thought we had some pretty good questions here as well. I really like Tori's question, why is DMD mainly found in males? We haven't uncovered that yet. And that is true. We haven't really looked at that. And that's going to be when we get back from break, where we dive into sort of like what's going on in terms of the gene itself. Where's it coming from and why? And how does it get in males only? And then some of you, this question, like up here, Dustin asked, does it affect other muscles such as smooth muscle? I don't think we've seen anything related to that, Dustin. I think we've seen that it pretty much targets the skeletal muscle and it works. There's a term for this, but it starts in the legs and works its way up through the body. And as they get older, it starts to affect the upper extremities. But it starts in the lower extremities, particularly in the legs, and that's where they lose the ability to walk first, and then eventually they lose their ability to use their hands and so forth. Again, a very sad disease because cognitively or mentally they stay just fine, and that their body though just sort of gives out. And we know that skeletal muscle is important. But Dustin, maybe there are some other muscles, like, how does it affect the heart, maybe, or does it start to seep into the smooth muscles? But I'm pretty sure it's primarily been said so far that it's a skeletal muscle issue. Keating asked, did DMD get started because of a mutation? I think this is interesting. Like and I was thinking about posting this as a question to you guys is, these particular genes, as we see, they're in all different, this gene is in all different cultures, it affects only males. genes like this are not really, beneficial to the organism. So how do they stick around? I mean, how do they kind of just linger within our in our human species, so to say? I mean, why is it still there? I mean, it doesn't make sense because evolution usually picks for chooses the best genes, and why are some of these genes are not good? So why are they sticking around? And how did that mutation take? When did it originally happen? I mean, Keating, that's a kind of a good question. There is like where this mutation come from, or how did it start? And then Haley has, do all normal working muscles contain dystrophin? That's a good question. I mean, yeah, I would imagine that they do, especially your skeletal muscles. And so, yeah, those are some good questions. I'd love to see more. And our question board, this one can stay pretty active. I'm actually going to delete this particular check mark and just say that, this is we want to have a driving question board. And this board here is going to stay up. Again, if you got other questions, feel free to update the question that you have or post it also on this page. I think this is a question. It's what we need is to have more questions, especially since I'm not in class. You can email me though, but anyway, get your question of the day done, update. And those of you that haven't been keeping up on this, I need to see some your participation as well. Notice that I do need you to change the color from yellow to blue when you've answered your question. So make sure you do that for me. And I think that's it for the Jamboard. You then have an assignment that for today, which is going to be tackling a POGL, process-oriented guided inquiry learning. And in that POGL that you should have received, you're going to look at, and let's just kind of look at that. It is DNA structure, and now we get into a little bit about replication or the copying of DNA. And so with this particular model, there's your first model. You're going to look at that. You've seen these things before. You've already dove into that, but now you start to see, again, how they're going to ask you questions about that to make sure you understand what's going on. And these different shapes you should be able to answer these questions, no problem. The substitute teacher for today, Mr. Stevens, will have a key on hand. So if you need any help from him, he will have that as well if you want to check on any of this stuff. But you want to basically go through this particular POGL, and this is where it gets into the new stuff in Model 2, which is how DNA is actually copied. Important concept to understand because that is something that is going on inside of our cells all the time. Our DNA is being copied, and so it gets into that there. And then it's got some follow-up questions that compare some different organisms, and then a question related to what we get into with the cell cycle, which eventually we'll get into that. So get this knocked out for today. See how far you get. I'll check in with the substitute teacher and see if all is well. And then tomorrow we'll probably get into a little bit of that transcription translation and try to understand what the DNA is doing going back to that simulator and understanding those concepts. Have a great day, everyone. If you got any questions, let me know. Get that Jamboard filled out. Get your POGL rocked out, and everything will keep on sailing. All right. Have a great one.